You know, I can't do this forever. I've been doing it since I was 21. As you move into your 80s, you say, hey, that's enough. Anytime there was a love scene on the screen, we'd go, oh, boo, you tell him, lover.
If you've ever watched Jeremiah Johnson, you probably remember the quiet snow, the stoic stairs, and Robert Redford becoming the ultimate mountain man. But behind that calm, icy world was a production so chaotic, strange, and downright risky that it's a miracle the film exists at all. From near-fatal accidents to ancient lore to scenes that were never meant to be filmed, the story behind this 1972 classic is wilder than the mountains themselves. Ready to see how deep it goes? 20. Robert Redford nearly died multiple times on set. Most actors talk about immersive roles, but Jeremiah Johnson pushed Robert Redford into the kind of real danger that no script could prepare him for. The production was shot almost entirely in the rugged Utah mountains, far from safety crews, hospitals, or anything close to a controlled environment. And because Redford insisted on doing almost every stunt himself, he ended up in situations that could have easily ended his career or his life. One close call happened during a river crossing sequence. The water was freezing, the current was faster than expected, and once Redford stepped in, he was swept off his feet instantly. The crew panicked as he vanished under the rapids, tumbling through rocks while still trying to hold on to his gear. When he resurfaced downstream, bruised and gasping, he joked about it, but everyone else knew it was inches from real disaster. Another moment came when Redford was handling a real horse in deep snow. The animal slipped and fell sideways and nearly rolled on top of him. Stunt coordinators rushed in, but he waved them off and insisted they keep filming. The camera captured the strain, the fear, the unpredictability, all real, all dangerous. Redford later admitted that Jeremiah Johnson was the closest he'd ever come to genuine harm in his entire career. The next fact gets even stranger. 19. The real Jeremiah Johnson was far more violent than the film shows. The movie version of Jeremiah Johnson is rugged, lonely, and haunted, but he's also controlled, introspective, and surprisingly gentle for a man living in the harsh frontier. The real-life figure who inspired him, not so much. The historical mountain man known as Liver-Eating Johnson had a reputation so brutal that even the toughest trappers refused to cross him. Johnson's nickname wasn't a joke or a tall tale. According to frontier accounts, he earned it during a years-long personal war with a Crow tribe after they allegedly killed his indigenous wife. The legend claims he hunted Crow warriors across the Rockies, and after each kill, removed and ate a piece of the liver as an act of symbolic revenge. While historians debate how literal this was, there's no question that the real Johnson carried a darker and more violent aura than Redford's soft-spoken portrayal. Sidney Pollack, the director, knew the true story, but deliberately toned it down. He wanted Johnson to feel like a mythic figure, a man shaped by the wilderness, not consumed by it. The liver-eating detail was considered too shocking, too graphic, and too extreme for a wide audience in 1972, especially with Redford as the lead. Ironically, fans who later discovered the real history were stunned at how much the film left out. Some even argue that the movie's quiet, thoughtful Johnson is almost an entirely different person than the wild legend who inspired him. 18. A crew mistake started a real forest fire. During filming, the mountains in Jeremiah Johnson looked serene and untouched. But the production wasn't always gentle with the landscape, one of the strangest and most dangerous. Accidents happened when a small effects fire grew wildly out of control. It started with a simple plan: create a smoky backdrop for a nighttime scene to give the shot more atmosphere. Technicians lit a controlled flame in a clearing, just enough to make a little haze. But mountain weather has a mind of its own. A sudden gust of wind swept through the valley, scattering embers into dry brush. Within seconds, the crew watched in horror as the controlled flame turned into a fast-moving wildfire. Gear was dropped, cameras abandoned, and the cast and crew scrambled to contain the growing blaze with whatever they could find: shovels, blankets, even coats. Redford reportedly helped fight the fire himself, beating at the flames until his arms were coated with soot. The incident could have grown into a massive disaster, but the team managed to stop the spread before it reached the tree line. Pollock later admitted in interviews that the crew got incredibly lucky, and local officials were furious. The near disaster remained mostly quiet for years, but it became one of the most whispered set stories among film insiders. And speaking of controversial moments, the next one gets even more sensitive: 17. The production was nearly shut down because of a sacred indigenous site. Long before Jeremiah Johnson arrived with cameras and snowy landscapes, the mountains they filmed in were steeped in indigenous history. During location scouting, the crew unknowingly picked a filming area that bordered ground considered sacred by local native communities. At first, no one realized the significance until representatives from the tribe visited the set and immediately raised concerns. According to accounts from crew members, what started as a polite conversation quickly escalated into a serious cultural issue. The tribe expressed that certain rituals, landmarks, and natural formations were not to be disturbed or used as backdrops for entertainment. The production suddenly found itself at risk of being shut down entirely. Sidney Pollack, surprisingly, handled the situation with genuine respect. He paused, filming, held meetings with tribal elders, and went through each planned scene to ensure nothing violated cultural boundaries. In one instance, a specific rock formation meant to appear in a hunting sequence was removed from the schedule altogether. Pollock even rewrote several pages to keep the story intact without crossing any lines. The conflict ended peacefully, but not without stress. Crew members later said it was one of the few moments that nearly ended the movie. And believe it or not, things could have been even darker, because the original script was nothing like what ended up on screen 16. The script was originally much darker. Pollock cut entire shock scenes. If you think Jeremiah Johnson feels intense now, imagine the version that almost got made. The earliest drafts, written before Sidney Pollack stepped in, were closer to a horror-tinged frontier nightmare than a reflective survival drama. Some scenes were so graphic that Pollock refused to shoot them. One deleted sequence depicted Johnson being forced to confront cannibalism during a brutal winter starvation period. Another involved a much more violent retaliation montage that leaned heavily into the real-life legend's darker lore. There was even a scrapped subplot revealing that Johnson's mental state was collapsing under isolation, including moments of hallucination and uncontrolled rage. Pollock tossed all of it. He believed that the heart of the film wasn't gore or shock value, it was quiet endurance. It was a man learning to survive, emotionally and physically, in a world that didn't care whether he lived or died. Redford agreed completely, pushing for a version that emphasized loneliness, nature, and mythic simplicity. Still, fragments of that earlier script peek through the final film. The silence, the slow pacing, the hints of grief and trauma. They're what remain after the darkest edges were shaved away. Some fans still wonder what the original movie might have looked like, but Pollock never regretted cutting it down. The next fact shows just how far Redford went for the version that did get made 15. Redford insisted on doing dangerous stunts himself. Robert Redford wasn't just acting like a rugged mountain man, he was determined to be one. From the very start of production, he made it clear he wanted to perform almost every stunt himself, no matter how icy, steep, or unpredictable the terrain was. While producers begged for stunt doubles, Redford kept brushing them off with a simple line: "If Johnson can do it, I can do it." One of the most infamous stunts involved a near-vertical climb up a snowy ridge. The crew had ropes, harnesses, and backup plans ready, all of which Redford refused. Instead, he clawed his way up the slope using his hands, boots, and raw determination. Halfway up, he slipped, just once, but enough to make several crew members lunge forward in panic. Somehow, he regained his footing, continued climbing, and topped the ridge with a grin. Another stunt required him to wrestle with a real horse in freezing temperatures. The animal wasn't trained for Hollywood-level obedience. It reacted like a real frontier horse would. Bucking and jerking unpredictably, Redford held on through the entire take, even as snow blasted into his face and ice formed on his coat. Sidney Pollack later admitted he aged 5 years during filming because Redford wouldn't stop pushing the limits. But he also credited the actor's commitment for the film's authentic look. The exhaustion and grit you see on Redford's face? 100% real. Speaking of brutal working conditions, wait until you hear what the winter did to the crew. 14. The movie was shot in a brutal winter that destroyed equipment. One reason Jeremiah Johnson feels so cold is because it was cold. Dangerously cold. The production team chose to film in the Utah mountains during one of the harshest winters on record, and the weather became the movie's most relentless antagonist. Crew members woke up to frozen boots, cameras coated in ice, and trucks that simply refused to start. The film equipment wasn't designed for that level of cold. Camera lenses cracked without warning. Film stock stiffened, jammed, and tore inside the cameras. At one point, a generator exploded after ice built up around its vents. The sound department had to wrap microphones with layers of cloth and fur just to keep them from freezing. Solid Redford joked that the crew spent more time surviving the shoot than making a movie. But there were real consequences. Some scenes were shot in a single take because conditions changed too quickly to reset. In others, the snow became so deep that the cast had to carve out pathways before filming could begin. Despite all that suffering, the harsh environment gave the movie its rugged look, something impossible to replicate on a controlled set. If the weather wasn't intense enough, the next problem had fur and claws. 13. A real grizzly bear was used, and it terrified the crew. In an era before CGI, filmmakers often relied on real animals, and Jeremiah Johnson took that tradition to the extreme. For Johnson's legendary encounter with the bear, the production brought in an actual trained grizzly, a massive creature weighing nearly 900 pounds. Even trained, the bear was unpredictable, and the handlers constantly warned everyone to keep their distance. Redford, though, he walked right up to it. One of the most nerve-wracking scenes involved Johnson being dragged through a cabin by the bear. Even though trainers insisted the bear understood its routine, it was still a grizzly, fast, powerful, and capable of killing a human with one swipe. The handlers stood just off camera, ready with commands and emergency tools, but crew members later admitted they were terrified the entire time. At one point, the bear unexpectedly turned toward Redford, who froze in place. The crew braced for disaster until the handler snapped a quick command, redirecting the animal instantly. Pollack reportedly stopped filming and took a long break after that, needing time to calm down. Today, no major studio would allow such a risky scene. But back then, it's what gave the moment its raw, startling realism. But not every danger on set was physical. Some were hidden right in the script's language, and that's where the next detail gets weird. 12. The Mountain Man dialogue was pulled from actual 1800 journals. One of the strangest quirks of Jeremiah Johnson is its quirky, frontier-style dialogue, the clipped phrases, odd grammar, and almost poetic ruggedness. It turns out the writers didn't make that up. They lifted much of it straight from real 19th-century trapper journals, letters, and oral histories. Sidney Pollack and screenwriters Johnston and Milius wanted authenticity so badly that they spent weeks reading old writings from fur trappers, explorers, and scouts. Many of these historical documents were almost unreadable by modern standards, full of misspellings, slang, and grammar that changed from sentence to sentence, but they loved it. Lines like, "You're the same dumb pilgrim that I've been tripping over for weeks," or "I know that mouth of yours, boy," were inspired directly by phrases found in these journals. Even the rhythm of the dialogue, half joke, half threat, half riddle, matches how early mountain men described their world. Actors found it challenging at first. They kept slipping into modern speech patterns only to be corrected by Pollock, who insisted the language needed to feel strange but familiar, like discovering an old dialect today. That quirky speech is one of the film's most iconic features. And surprisingly, some of the people speaking that unusual dialogue weren't actors at all. Which brings us to the Trivia 11. Many extras were real modern trappers living off the grid. To make Jeremiah Johnson feel genuinely lived in, Sidney Pollock did something unusual. He recruited real-life trappers and outdoorsmen as extras. These weren't actors learning how to fake frontier life. They were people who spent their winters in the wilderness, living off the land, trapping animals, and surviving in conditions far harsher than anything the cast experienced. Having them on set added authenticity. Their movements, hunting methods, and even the way they handled gear couldn't be faked. But working with non-actors also brought challenges. Some refused to follow blocking instructions, wandered off to check traps, or argued over how a scene should feel. Pollock reportedly learned to compromise. He let them improvise within the camera frame, which gave many sequences an unpredictable, organic feel. Their presence also created tension with the cast. Redford had to earn their respect, showing that he could handle the mountains himself. It wasn't Hollywood magic, it was real survival skill being tested alongside performance. 10. The child actor. Playing Caleb was nearly recast because he was too good. The boy who played Caleb, the young mountain kid Johnson befriends, wasn't your typical child actor. According to crew accounts, he was so natural and expressive that some crew members worried he would upstage Redford in every scene. The producers even considered recasting him to tone down his performance. But after Pollock watched the raw footage, he changed his mind. Redford himself became protective of the boy, tutoring him on how to hold a rifle, handle a horse, and move through the snow safely. Some of Caleb's most memorable scenes, like climbing cliffs or trudging through knee-deep snow, were performed mostly by the actor himself, with Redford nearby to ensure safety. The decision to keep him paid off. The chemistry between Redford and Caleb added an emotional layer that critics still praise. The boy's authenticity made audiences forget it was acting at all. He felt like a real child growing up in the mountains. One of the most famous scenes was shot completely without rehearsal, making it one of the most spontaneous moments in the movie. 9. One famous scene was filmed with zero rehearsal. Hollywood thrives on planning, but Jeremiah Johnson embraced spontaneity. One of the most iconic sequences, the moment Johnson quietly approaches the cabin after tracking the bear, was shot with no rehearsal at all. Redford, the cinematographer, and Pollock huddled briefly, but the timing, camera angles, and movement were improvised on the spot. The snow, the wind, even the way Redford's breath fogged in the cold air were entirely uncontrolled. This unplanned chaos gave the scene a raw, tense realism that would have been impossible to stage traditionally. Crew members later admitted their anxiety. The cameras were heavy, the terrain icy, and the actors had to hit marks while reacting to natural elements like gusts of wind or sudden animal noises. One misstep could have ruined the take or even caused injury. Yet the result? A perfectly framed, atmospheric moment that feels almost magical, but its magic came from improvisation under extreme conditions. And if you think improvisation was extreme, wait until you hear how much Redford had to learn about real frontier survival. 8. Redford mastered real frontier skills and used them for life. To truly become Jeremiah Johnson, Robert Redford didn't just memorize lines, he trained like a real mountain man. Weeks before filming, he studied survival techniques with experienced trappers. learning to track animals, start fires without matches, handle rifles safely, and move efficiently through snow-covered terrain. He even built cabins, chopped wood, and practiced river crossings to match the movements of someone who actually lived in the wilderness. On set, these skills made every action look effortless. When Redford wrestled with animals, tied knots, or chopped logs, it wasn't acting, it was the culmination of real experience. Even snowfalls, river treks, and heavy gear felt natural, because he knew how a man of the mountains would move. The training didn't end with filming. Redford continued applying these skills in his personal life, from camping trips with family to backcountry adventures. In interviews, he joked that the mountains had trained him for the rest of life, teaching lessons in patience, observation, endurance, and risk management. These skills also helped him connect with the character on a deeper emotional level. Every quiet glance, every cautious step through the snow carried authenticity, born from real hardship. Redford's dedication blurred the line between actor and mountain man, giving Johnson the mythic, lived-in presence audiences still remember today. 7. Jeremiah Johnson, the studio gamble they almost didn't take. Even with Robert Redford attached, Jeremiah Johnson was a risky proposition. Studios worried a slow, quiet, snowy Western would flop. Unlike the typical Westerns of the era, gunfights, saloons, fast action, this film leaned into isolation, silence, and realism. Some sequences took days, even weeks, due to unpredictable weather, and dialogue was minimal, leaving little room for conventional crowd-pleasing drama. Pollock passionately defended the project. He argued the authenticity of the setting, Redford's commitment, and the mythic tone would resonate with audiences seeking something different. Investors hesitated. Some even tried to cancel it mid-pre-production. But Pollock and Redford persisted, convincing the studio to let the project proceed. When it finally premiered, the film didn't explode at the box office immediately. Critics were impressed, but audiences took time to catch on. Gradually, word of mouth, stunning cinematography, and Redford's committed performance transformed the film into a beloved classic. Today, it's hailed as one of the most influential Westerns of the 70s, celebrated for quiet intensity rather than spectacle. The gamble paid off, proof that sometimes risk, patience, and artistic vision outweigh formulas. Without that faith, audiences might never have experienced the enduring myth of Jeremiah Johnson. 6. The iconic hat tip was a complete accident. One of Jeremiah Johnson's most memorable images, the moment Redford tips his hat, wasn't scripted. During filming, a gust of wind blew his hood slightly off his head, and instinctively, Redford raised his hand to adjust it. Sidney Pollock noticed immediately. The motion looked respectful, almost ceremonial, as if Johnson were acknowledging another character. Rather than reshoot, Pollock decided to keep the take. That unplanned gesture perfectly captured the stoic, thoughtful humanity of Johnson, the quiet dignity of a man shaped by the wilderness. Fans have debated the hat tip for decades. Is it respect, acknowledgement, or a farewell? Pollock never clarified, allowing viewers to interpret its meaning, which contributed to the film's mythic aura. The simplicity of the moment highlights the power of small, spontaneous details. In a film filled with grueling stunts, harsh weather, and dangerous animals, it's this subtle, almost accidental gesture that resonates most emotionally. It shows that sometimes authenticity isn't manufactured. It happens naturally, in the interplay between actor, director, and environment. Today, the hat tip is one of the most iconic visual cues in cinema, immortalizing Johnson's quiet heroism and reinforcing why this film remains a cultural touchstone. 5. Most of Johnson's lines are under 100 words, by design. One of the subtle yet fascinating aspects of Jeremiah Johnson is the way dialogue is crafted. Almost every line spoken by Redford's character clocks in under 100 words, sometimes just a few terse syllables. This wasn't an accident. Sidney Pollack and the screenwriters deliberately designed Johnson to speak sparingly, mirroring the real-life mountain men he was based on. Mountain men weren't known for long-winded speeches. Survival demanded focus, silence, and observation. By limiting dialogue, the filmmakers emphasized action over words, letting body language, facial expressions, and environmental interaction tell much of the story. The quiet lines also amplify tension, allowing audiences to feel the weight of the wilderness. Every pause, glance, and grunt carries meaning. Redford embraced this approach. He learned to communicate subtle emotion through posture, eye contact, and the way he moved in the snow. This economy of speech makes Johnson feel simultaneously human and mythic, the man of few words whose presence dominates a scene. Interestingly, the short lines also helped other cast members. They had to react authentically to Johnson's minimal communication, often improvising responses or physical gestures, which added realism. Critics later praised this understated dialogue as a masterstroke, showing that sometimes less truly is more. Next fact uncovers a deleted subplot that sheds light on Johnson's real motivation to enter the mountains, a story most fans never knew. 4. A deleted subplot explained why Johnson really went into the mountains. Most viewers assume Jeremiah Johnson's journey into the wilderness was a spiritual quest or a desire for solitude. But early drafts of the script revealed a darker, more personal motivation that never made it to the screen. In the original version, Johnson's family, specifically a tragic incident involving his wife and child, was the catalyst for leaving civilization behind. This subplot was ultimately cut because Pollack and Redford wanted the story to focus on survival and mythic legend rather than domestic tragedy. Deleted scenes suggested Johnson had endured loss at the hands of hostile forces, leaving him angry, grieving, and seeking isolation as a form of escape. These scenes would have added a psychological depth, showing the internal scars that matched the harsh exterior landscape. While the main film hints at grief through fleeting expressions, the full emotional weight was never filmed. Interestingly, some of this deleted content influenced small moments that survived. Johnson's silence, his moments of reflection by the river, and his cautious interactions with others echo the emotional burden that subplot intended to convey. Fans who later read the script drafts noted that this missing layer would have made Johnson less mythic and more human, but perhaps also darker and less heroic. The decision to remove it reflects Pollack's focus. Make the mountain man a universal figure of endurance, not a man haunted by domestic tragedy. 3. The film sparked a 70s mountain man tourism craze. Believe it or not, Jeremiah Johnson didn't just inspire moviegoers, it inspired a whole generation to seek out the wilderness. After the film's release, Americans became fascinated with the idea of leaving civilization behind, living off the land, and embracing the rugged mountain lifestyle. Outdoor gear sales skyrocketed, and guidebooks for survival skills and backcountry camping flew off shelves. Entrepreneurial trappers and tour operators capitalized on the craze. Mountain man experiences popped up in places like Utah, Colorado, and Montana, where paying customers could learn trapping, firemaking, and primitive shelter building, essentially living like Jeremiah Johnson for a few days. Some even signed up for winter survival courses, hoping to emulate the solitude and endurance Redford displayed on screen. The craze extended to pop culture as well. Magazines ran features on real-life trappers, frontiersman biographies were reprinted, and people began dressing in fringed buckskin or adopting long hair and beards to emulate the mountain man. Even ski lodges and national parks noticed increased visitor interest in backcountry trekking. While the fad faded by the late 70s, The film cemented its status as a cultural touchstone for rugged individualism. It didn't just tell a story, it shaped a national imagination about wilderness life, self-reliance, and the allure of isolation. Redford himself would later call this one of the hardest films of his career, a testament to the physical and mental challenges of becoming Johnson. 2. Redford still calls it one of his hardest films ever made. Even decades later, Robert Redford has described Jeremiah Johnson as one of the most physically and mentally demanding projects of his career. Between the freezing temperatures, treacherous mountain terrain, and relentless schedule, the role pushed him to his limits. Unlike most Hollywood productions, this film offered no climate-controlled sets or safety nets. Every shot demanded authenticity, often at real personal risk. Redford had to haul logs, build cabins, trek through deep snow, and navigate icy rivers, all while performing stunts and maintaining the emotional subtlety the character required. The physical toll was compounded by the film's shooting style. Long takes, minimal dialogue, and harsh environmental conditions meant Redford couldn't rely on editing to hide mistakes or fatigue. Mentally, the isolation also weighed heavily. Spending days alone in frozen valleys, often with nothing but the camera crew nearby, blurred the lines between performance and survival. Redford later joked that he became Johnson too completely, learning more about endurance and patience than any other role had taught him. Despite the challenges, he credits the film for sharpening his focus as an actor and deepening his appreciation for the frontier experience, giving audiences a performance that feels rugged, real, and enduring. And finally, fans still debate one of the most mysterious aspects of the film: the ending. 1. Fans still debate whether Johnson dies at the end. One of the most enduring mysteries of Jeremiah Johnson is its ambiguous ending. After surviving countless hardships, viewers see Redford's Johnson trudging through the snow, facing an uncertain future. The film never explicitly shows whether he lives, dies, or simply disappears into legend. Some argue the final shot, a long, silent walk into the mountains, implies survival, a man at peace with the wilderness. Others interpret the empty, snow-filled landscapes as a hint that Johnson succumbs to the harsh conditions, his story fading into myth. Pollock never clarified intentionally, wanting audiences to wrestle with the idea of human fragility versus endurance. This ambiguity has sparked decades of debate among fans, critics, and film historians alike. The uncertainty contributes to Johnson's mythic status: part hero, part ghost, part cautionary tale of life in the wilderness. The open-ended finale perfectly mirrors the real mountain man's unpredictable life, full of danger, mystery, and untold stories waiting to be discovered. From wild stunts to snowy disasters, Jeremiah Johnson proves that the story behind the camera can be just as epic as what's on screen. Subscribe for more behind-the-scenes secrets and legendary movie facts you won't find anywhere else.